Chapter 31. A New Friendship. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As Stella crossed the central courtyard and approached the doorway that led into the neighboring training courtyard, the spring in her step slowly died, and the bubbling feeling in her chest transitioned into dread. Why did her happy reunion with Tree have to be tainted by the presence of a Ravenborn? Stella let out a long breath to calm her nerves. Diana Ravenborn was far stronger than her, that much was clear. The gap in their upbringing was too vast to overcome with pure cultivation. Why was life so unfair? Why did Diana get all the love and attention in the world while she was left alone in a desolate courtyard for so many years? Stella clenched her fists as the distant memory of her father patiently teaching her the only techniques she knew to this day slowly replayed in her mind. He would still be alive if not for the pressure upon her old man's shoulders to rush his cultivation due to families like the Ravenborn that set their eyes on his family's peak. His kind smile and energetic blonde hair that had waved and glowed in the sunshine were all she remembered of him. Stella closed her eyes for a brief moment to hold back the tears. She was a big girl now, and she had Tree to look out for her. Now wasn't the time to show weakness. Her father had always chuckled warmly and told her to be stronger than he ever was as he patted her small head and told her stories of his younger days. A breeze blew as Stella stood rooted before the ajar wooden door separating the courtyards. How was she supposed to face the daughter of the man that orchestrated her father's death with anything but wrathful fury and a venomous sneer? "You are better than that, Stella," she whispered to herself as she played with the earrings that Tree had gifted her as a child to calm herself. "Don't be like them, have an open but guarded heart." Taking a final deep breath, Stella pushed past the door, crossed the corridor, and entered the training courtyard. It was as she remembered it, apart from the destroyed far wall overgrown with red vines and the deep gashes left everywhere, likely from Diana's training. In the center, standing before a badly beaten-up training dummy, was Diana. Noticing Stella's presence, Diana looked over his shoulder, finished talking to the tree. Her voice was dull but not cold. Nevertheless, it lacked that sharpness Stella had expected. She knew how she interacted with Tree was abnormal, but she cared little for it. "I have." Stella stayed where she was standing with her arms crossed. "I see you have made a wreck of my training courtyard." Diana turned to face her. A sword lazily hung in her hand with the tip just above the ground. "I admit the gashes in the floor were me, and I apologize for that. But the rest of the damage was from my father, not me." Stella raised a brow. "Your father was here. Grand Elder Ravenborn. Was he looking for me?" Shaking her head, Diana smiled. "Nah, the old bastard went supernova. The Winterrath and Evergreen families have taken over my peak and slaughtered everyone." Diana gestured to the hole in the wall. "Want to take a look?" Stella found her words unbelievable. It was hard to imagine such a titanic family falling to lower-tier ones like the Winterrath and Evergreen families. Although she had heard the Ravenborn family had been in decline for a long time, it was still weird to hear that the family that had plagued her mind for so long was just gone. "Sure." Stella walked over, and Diana led the girl across the training courtyard, kicking up sand as they went. Stella looked to the side and noticed Diana was a bit shorter than her and had a rather odd dressing style. The blood that stained the shirt wasn't helping the look, but it suited her. "Maybe I should look into some new clothes," Stella thought as she glanced down at the ordinary black cloak she had worn for years that was tattered and needed a good wash. Diana flicked her finger as the two approached the hole overgrown with red vines, and a burst of blue flames shot out, incinerating the red vines in seconds. Once the smoke cleared, Stella was confused. Ravenborn Peak was still there, but the pavilion had been replaced with a grand palace of white stone. Even from so far away, Stella could feel hundreds of cultivators mingling around the palace. "That is the new palace built by the Winterrath and Evergreen families." Diana frowned. "Right where my home used to be." Stella's eyes wandered to the staircase connecting the palace to Darklight City below. A constant stream of mortals and cultivators went up and down like worker ants. Diana pointed to the mountain's base, and Stella followed her finger. That's where my father went supernova. After that, the south side of Darklight City was destroyed and naturally rebuilt. Those humans are always eager to move to Chi-dense areas for improved lifespan and health. Stella absent-mindedly nodded as she took it all in. Being told the family that had put her through so much was dead and actually seeing the evidence of their destruction with her own two eyes were two different things. This provided some closure but also made Stella feel a little lost. Not because she had a lifelong vendetta against House Ravenborn to fulfill, but rather what to do with the girl standing beside her. Stella could understand the surface level of her situation. Her family's dead, therefore, her home and economic backing have vanished. Diana is just like her, sort of. Of course, there were noticeable differences, but Stella could also see some possible bridges between them. Her almost instant defeat to Diana played in her mind, taunting her. She likely wouldn't have survived the wilderness without Maples's obvious help that she didn't wish to question. She needed techniques like Diana. Stella cast a side glance at her, and the girl was just staring at her old home with a distant expression. Do you miss them? Stella thought she saw a longing in Diana's eyes. Diana snorted, absolutely not. My life has been complete hell since you killed my brother. I was shoved into a position I didn't want and forced to compete with other scions despite my meager talent. There was a moment of silence, and Stella hummed to herself, and you didn't know of the murder plot against me. Diana rolled her eyes. I was like 10 at the time. Even if I did somehow know about it, so what? What could I have done? My brother was the one with power at the time, not me. Diana paused before adding, however, right before my father died, he sent me on a suicide mission to kill you. Diana gritted her teeth in silent rage. My father made an ultimatum. Either I kill you and suffer the consequences, or defy him and die by his hands. From that moment, I knew my life as a Ravenborn was over. Looking up at the sky, Diana let out a small sigh of relief, but with father dead, that burden has been lifted from my exhausted shoulders. I am now free of all that nonsense the family tried to shove onto me. Stella now had a much better picture of Diana's life and circumstances. It would appear that her assumptions about Diana's lavish life were wrong, but there was no way she would admit fault. Deciding to change the subject, Stella asked, so why are you here exactly? Well, long story short, I came here before my father died on a mission to investigate what happened to Darren, my father's brother, and naturally found it empty since you were off in the wilderness. Diana gestured through the hole in the wall with a nod. So when everything went kaboom, and I barely survived a kidnapping from some arsehole called Wayne Evergreen, I needed a place to lie low in case he came looking for me. Stella frowned. So you picked my home of all places? Yes, Diana said flatly as she looked at a beast core in the palm of her hand. With my money cut off, I had to live frugally. In just a year, I'm already down to my last beast core. Stella reached over and grabbed the beast core, crushing it to dust in her hand. We do not need these vile things that affect our state of mind and only lead to madness. Without these tainted things, we would cooperate like those in the Celestial Empire. But Diana's eyes seemed to glaze over as she looked at her now empty hand. I'm stuck at a bottleneck and on a time crunch for the Grand Elder exam. Without beast cores, I don't see how it can be possible. Stella reached over and put a hand on Diana's shoulder, which made the girl almost yelp. Diana, we are all on our own warpath through life with different hurdles to overcome. Don't compare yourselves to other scions and let negativity fester in your mind. You are the main character of your story, and so long as you wield the hammer of hope to demolish the obstacles standing in your way, there is no bottleneck you cannot overcome. Tightening her grip and meeting Diana's eyes, Stella muttered, if you don't believe in yourself, then who will? Diana nodded, her dull eyes lightening up a little. You're right. I shouldn't need beast cores to progress. If those in the Celestial Empire can rise without them, so can I. Stella smiled and nodded, exactly. I'm also aiming for the Grand Elder exam. So why don't we aim for it together? Sure. But does that mean I can stay here? Diana asked while scratching the back of her neck. I got nowhere else to go. Of course, if you teach me a few techniques. Seeing the girl nod, Stella tightened her grip again, but no going near or feeding Tree anything ever again. You hear me? Stay in this courtyard. Seeing Diana roll her eyes, Stella chuckled and walked off toward the central courtyard. Let's speak again later. I got an old friend to catch up with. Diana smiled at Stella's departing back but couldn't help but mutter under her breath, whatever you say, you crazy tree hugger. Chapter 32. A new summon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ashlock glared at the pile of corpses of abominations that was about a person high. He had been expecting a bit more, considering Stella had been away for a year, but it was still a substantial amount. Most surprising to Ashlock was that he could maintain his rationality in the face of so much food. The hunger was gnawing away at his brain, like a terrible itch inside his mind. But it was resistible. For how long? Ashlock didn't know, but he had an opportunity here. If I can resist consuming all the corpses at once, I can avoid an S.grade draw. The horror of the Worldwalker's alien gaze still sent shivers down Ashlock's bark. All I need to do is separate the corpses into smaller piles somehow. Ashlock could try, devour each corpse one at a time, but he didn't trust in his ability to maintain his rationality for much longer. His instincts as a demonic tree to consume were overtaking his logical human mind. With the option of eating one corpse at a time off the table, Ashlock looked at his skill list, and his newest skill, Root Puppet, stood out. Identifying the most suitable corpse from the pile of bodies for his plan. Ashlock cast Root Puppet on a mutated gorilla. Only its top half was poking out of the heap, so he silently prayed that the corpse still had its legs intact. Using Root Puppet on the bird corpse a while ago confirmed a few things to Ashlock. Such as he needed an intact corpse with its flesh and bones, otherwise, it's far too unstable and struggles to balance while walking. A thin black root broke up from the soil and snaked toward the gorilla monster's slightly ajar mouth. Now that Ashlock got a closer look, all the beasts in the pile could be mirrored to something from Earth, but were also different enough from anything he had ever seen before to doubt this was another planet. For example, the gorilla monster had 10 clawed fingers per hand, for a total of 20. A third eye was also located in the back of its skull, but it was snake-like with a slit pupil. It took a few minutes to turn the large monster into a root puppet, but to Ashlock, it felt like days. Resisting the overwhelming hunger consuming his mind was more challenging than staying awake during the dark and cold winter. The pile of corpses shifted as Ashlock took control of the gorilla. It felt like millions of hair-thin roots had infiltrated every inch of the monster, and with the skill doing most of the work, Ashlock could make the beast rise. And that is where some new problems arose. In usual necromancy, the corpse would be powered by mana, but in this world, there was no mana, only chi. The beast naturally needed a type of fuel to stand and move around. The dormant beast core inside the gorilla hummed to life, but thin cracks started forming on its surface as chi flooded the body. Finally, it stood on its hind legs while shrugging off all the other corpses. Ashlock could control it, although it still had that terrifying jitteriness that the bird had suffered from, which made complex movements a pipe dream. Ashlock directed the gorilla to shove the corpses into 3 distinct piles. If he had to guess, there were over 1,000 sacrifice credits up for grabs here, but he didn't wish to draw an S-grade or even an A-grade skill. Ashlock believed he needed a wider diversity of options, and by splitting it into 3 draws, he would hopefully achieve just that. It took a while, but the gorilla was incredibly strong, easily able to haul a few corpses at a time by skewering them with its many claws and dragging them into piles. It was at this moment the door to the courtyard opened, and Stella strode in with a beaming smile, but she almost missed a step in surprise as she noticed one of the corpses moving around. A sword instantly appeared in her hand, shrouded in her purple flames. Ashlock couldn't even react in time as she teleported and thrust the sword straight through the gorilla's chest. Ashlock tried to signal Stella that the gorilla was friendly by flashing his leaves with lilac flames twice, but she wasn't looking at him. Instead, her focus was entirely on the moving corpse. She twisted the sword before pulling it out and dragging out a good chunk of the gorilla's chest. Old blood poured from the wound, which clearly smelled foul as Stella's nose wrinkled up, and she took a few steps back, bloodied sword at the ready. Then, keeping one eye on the beast, her other wandered to Ashlock, and her brows furrowed, seeing him flashing no with his leaves. No. She tilted her head in confusion, scrutinizing the beast once more. It just stood there, its eyes unmoving like a corpse. A black root snaked up its leg, across its chest, and into the side of its mouth. Are you controlling this thing? Make it raise its arms if you are. Ashlock complied, and the gorilla raised its clawed arms above its head, seemingly unbothered by the hole in its chest. In fact, Ashlock was curious how Stella had even killed the gorilla out in the wilderness since it lacked any surface wounds and the only weapon she used was a sword or daggers. A question for another time. Right now, he needed to calm Stella down. The gorilla slowly lowered its hands, pointed at itself, and then at Ashlock a few times with jittery movements. Stella lowered her sword, flicking it once to get rid of the sickly blood, and looked around at the three neat piles of corpses. She shook her head with a smile. Tree, you have done something crazy again. What kind of demonic tree can control its food? She couldn't hold back her giggling as she walked toward the gorilla, and you made it organize your food. What a glutton, ha ha ha. She was practically wiping tears from her eyes at how ridiculous the situation was. Ashlock ignored her amusement at his expense since he felt his time with the gorilla was running out. The beast core inside was moments away from cracking. A mini explosion went off inside the gorilla as the beast's core shattered. Chi rushed out of the freshly made hole by Stella's sword and made the girl take a step back as the gorilla briefly faltered. Then Ashlock felt it. When he had used root puppet on the bird, it had demanded chi from him to move, but due to the bird's tiny size, it was hardly noticeable. Whereas the gorilla was the size of 3 adult men. Ashlock felt an ungodly pull like a vacuum as chi was pulled from his humming soul core and transferred to the gorilla. It's going to explode again, isn't it? Last time, when he had pushed so much chi into the bird, it had exploded as his chi reacted with the ambient chi left in the bird's meat, causing a rapid decay, and finally, when the heat and pressure got too much, an explosion occurred. Stella watched as the gorilla lit up like a touch with lilac flames. Then, it stumbled to the side as its meat began to sizzle and fall off the bone. Stella quickly took a few more steps back and seemed to realize something. Oh, Tree. You are the one who caused that explosion. I should have realized it sooner. Ashlock naturally cut the connection to the gorilla as soon as possible to avoid it exploding. However, he knew something like this might occur, so he'd left a corpse on the far side of the courtyard to be used later as he still wanted to try and communicate with Stella by drawing in the dirt or on a slab or stone. The gorilla tumbled to the ground like a puppet cut from its strings, and the lilac flames died out shortly after. The smell of burnt meat filled the courtyard as the corpse kept sizzling for a bit longer. Unable to hold back his hunger anymore, Ashlock targeted the gorilla and the pile of corpses closest to it. Black vines erupted through the cracks in the broken runic formation and mummified the heap. The sound of snapping bones like fireworks echoed out as the black vines slowly wrapped around the pile like a coiling viper, crushing the corpses and secreting a dissolving fluid. Stella walked past the mess and slothfully laid down on the oak bench. I hope you like the food, although most of it was caught by Maple since the monsters out there in the wilderness are far too strong for me. She let out a long sigh, but hopefully, Diana will teach me some techniques, and then I'll be far stronger than I am now. Ashlock only half listened to the girl's ramblings as he relished in the rush of chi traveling down the vines and into his trunk. Maybe after all this, I will even go up a stage in the soul fire realm. Stella talked for a few more hours, but after a while, she got up to train with Diana, giving Ashlock some much-needed peace. Plus 500 SC, the notification came right as the black vines retreated into the ground. Ashlock still felt hungry with all the corpses waiting to be eaten, so he quickly summoned his sign.in system. Idle tree daily sign.in system day. 3149 daily credit. 1 sacrifice credit. 500, sign in. Without hesitation, Ashlock decided to sign in. Sign in successful, 501 credits consumed, unlocked AC. Grade summon. Ash Spider, AC grade summon. Ashlock was left scratching his non-existent head in confusion. Why had 500 credits given him such a low grade thing? From his previous experiments, AC grade draw was usually in the 100 credit range, whereas 500 credits were in the A grade range. Thinking back, the only other time Ashlock had gotten a summon was the World Walker, a supposed S grade for 2,600 points. Actually, what if the different reward types cost a different number of credits? Would summons cost the most, while items cost the least? Now Ashlock was once again left stumped. The system seemed so straightforward, but a few mysteries remained unsolved. Ashlock pushed those thoughts away and focused on his new summon, as he had never gotten the chance to use one before. How did summoning something differ from a skill, for example? He had no idea. Summon. Ash Spider. Yes/no, like the last time he unlocked a summon, a system notification floated in his mind. Naturally, Ashlock mentally pressed yes. A rift in space, this time much smaller, about the size of a human, opened above Ashlock's branches, and many gray-haired limbs crawled through. Chapter 33. World Tree. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ashlock had never been a big fan of spiders, so he could only question his decision to summon one. Ashlock looked up in total terror as a spider the size of a large car slowly crawled out of a crack in space. 8 blood-red eyes peeked through the gap, followed by many gray-haired legs. The worst part. The summoning was happening right above him. So the only place for the spider to go was down. Onto his branches. The thought of such a creature crawling around on him made him feel skittish and want to run. But it couldn't, he was a fucking tree. The courtyard door slammed open as Stella and Diana scrambled into the central courtyard with purple and blue flames lighting up the dark evening. They both had swords drawn, and their heads snapped upward toward the spider crawling from the rift. Not again. Stella murmured as she shuddered. What do you mean not again? Diana gritted her teeth, and mist began to gather around her. Tell me. This has happened before. Stella stood rooted in place, sword shaking in her hand as the memory of the World Walker played in her mind, but last time, the godlike creature on the other side just looked at me with its terrifying gaze before leaving. Is the tree doing this? Diana's flames flared up as she prepared to fight. Before Stella could answer, Ashlock flashed his leaf a single time to signal yes. Tree said yes. Stella lowered her sword so the tip pointed to the ground, and her flames died down a bit. It should be fine then. You can speak to the tree. Diana grumbled as she raised her sword. You trust it way too much. Do you have any idea what this implies? No. Stella tilted her head. Tree does many strange things, but I see nothing wrong with it. Like what? Diana glanced at Stella and saw her apprehensiveness to answer. I promise to tell no one, but this is way more serious than you realize. I need to know the full truth before I devise a plan to save Tree. Save Tree? Stella seemed bewildered. Is it sick? Ashlock was only half listening to the conversation between the two girls and hoped that Diana didn't cut him down or kill his new summon. I wasted 500 points on this, so even if the thing is creepy as hell, I will still find a use for it. But the news that there was something wrong with him was worrying. Had she figured out he had a system? Diana shook her head as half of the spider had crawled out of the rift. Not sick, but a possible threat to the world. Diana pointed to her jeans. You see this clothing? It's sold by the merchants. Ever heard of them? Stella had heard of them, so she nodded. Those tiny groups of super-powerful cultivators that roam the wilderness in search of secret realms and then sell the artifacts they find at a ridiculous price, but I have never bought anything from them. Too expensive. Exactly. Diana cut Stella off as she spoke quickly. These clothes were part of a set made with artifacts found from secret realms monopolized by the merchants. They will do anything to enter a secret realm and take its contents. Diana then gestured to the rift in space above Ashlock, and that right there is an opening to a secret realm. Ashlock felt like he had been hit with a bombshell. Was he opening rifts to other realms? Attracting the attention of these merchants seemed like a terrible idea. Diana continued without pause since Stella still seemed apprehensive to reveal secrets. Have you heard about the secret realms and how they formed? Stella nervously shook her head and clenched her fists. She didn't like the idea of these merchants coming to take Tree away from her. No, I never really cared for the secret realms. Only Star Core cultivators can enter them and survive. Well, long story short, Diana said as the spider was almost through the rift. The secret realms are formed by worlds getting too close to each other for a short period, creating an overlap between them. However, this wasn't always the case. Ashlock tried to distract himself from the incoming spider by listening to Diana's exciting information. The knowledge that there was an overlap between worlds suggested the potential to hope or interact with other worlds. Maybe he could return to Earth one day, but did he even want to? His life on Earth had been cut short, but it was a rather dull life with few friends or family to care for him. Would I even be able to cultivate back on Earth? Does it have chi? Back before the current monarch realms walked this land, all the worlds were held together by a world tree. Diana said with a huff since Stella stared blankly at her. Stella, this is knowledge you should know. The world tree used to connect all the worlds with its roots, but it sucked up all the chi for its growth. So everyone banded together to cut its root and unleash the chi back into this world. Which led to the rise of the cultivators and also the beasts. What is your point? Stella was clearly baffled. Diana pointed at Ashlock and shouted, that is no demonic tree. It's a fucking world tree. Stella blinked her eyes, and Ashlock's brain froze. Was he a world tree? Nowhere in his system did it suggest that. On the contrary, it clearly states that he is a demonic tree. But his system had to have come from somewhere, and so did the items and powers he gained. Did I obtain Stella's earrings from a secret realm? Did I pull it through a rift in space and into my inventory? Ashlock had no idea what to believe anymore. Stella rubbed her temples. So tree is a baby world tree, and merchants may wish to take him away to gain access to the secret realms. Diana nodded, but not just that. Even the Celestial Empire will want to chop him down. The birth of a new world tree signifies the end of the cultivator era. Now, this was just getting out of hand. Ashlock highly doubted he would cause the end of an entire era and ruin the world. But it gave Ashlock some ideas about his system's origin and why he might be a man stuck in a tree. Let's think. I consume the chi from beasts and people, and in return, I get points I can use to summon things, which I now know are likely from secret realms or gaps between worlds. These new skills, items, and summons help me grow, so I can acquire more points to grow even bigger. Maybe he was a world-ending tree. Ashlock looked up again and saw the spider had finished coming through the rift, but if he looked really closely, he could see a tether of chi, as if the spider was being dragged through the gap with a leash. With a pop, the rift in space closed, and the spider fell and landed heavily on one of Ashlock's many branches, causing the branch to bend slightly and groan. Holy shit, it's heavy. The spider was the size of a car and weighed as much as one. Yet, surprisingly, it didn't feel as weird as Ashlock had thought, perhaps due to his bark's lack of sensitivity to something as delicate as hairs. Instead, all he felt was 8 points of weight spread out over a few branches. Name summon. Name. Ashlock stared at the prompt for a moment. What was an appropriate name to give to a car-sized spider that had been pulled from another dimension? I will give it something normal to remove how monstrous it is. A few generic names flashed through his mind, but a particular name seemed fitting. L.R.G. Larry. Ash Spider, Larry, has been summoned. The knowledge of how summons worked flooded Ashlock's mind. He had hoped the creature was something he could summon over and over by spending chi or daily credits, but after the knowledge from Diana, the fact that it was an actual living creature that, once dead, was dead forever made sense. He had literally made the system open a rift, dragged some poor creature from its home, and placed it under mind control. Larry, I will take good care of you, my very creepy-looking but fluffy new friend. Ashlock cast his sight away from the spider and tried to pretend it was a cute dog. The spider stood there, motionless as if it were a reanimated corpse. Ashlock tried to talk to it in his mind, but nothing happened. Do I need to do something special? Ashlock's non-existent eyes wandered to the thin tether of chi he could see connecting him and the spider. Focusing on it, he sent a command, take care of yourself and roam the mountain. Catch food outside if you need it, but stay close by. Ashlock could likely cut the tether and free Larry from the mind control, but he wasn't sure Stella and Diana could survive fighting against a rogue ash spider from some demon realm since it looked rather powerful, even though it was only a C-grade summon. The spider seemed to come back to life after receiving the order as it looked around. Its many red eyes landed on Maple, who was still sleeping, and it backed away while hissing. Maple opened an eye and glared at it, causing Larry to scurry off across Ashlock's branches with as much elegance as a dump truck. Stella and Diana both screamed as the massive spider threw itself over their heads while casting a looming shadow, landed in the training courtyard, and then made its way over to the broken wall to leave. Then a fantastic idea occurred to Ashlock, and he shouted down the mental link he had with Larry, and bring me some snacks too. Happy with getting rid of the creepy spider for a while, Ashlock turned his attention to the 2 remaining piles of corpses and cast Devour on the nearest one. I wonder what my next reward will be. Chapter 34. A Seed of Hope. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Diana looked through the courtyard door at the departing ash-haired spider that had crawled from a secret realm. Just by watching it, she knew her chances of winning were slim. The sword in her hand felt like a toothpick compared to that monstrosity. It scurried across the training courtyard, fleeing through the hole in the wall with a quietness that didn't match its ridiculous size. She had seen wild boar that were smaller, yet could be heard from a mile away as they rampaged through the forests. With the spider gone and the eerie silence of the empty pavilion returning, the tree's vines munching on the next pile of corpses caressed her ears. The cracking of bones, squeezing of flesh, and the rustling of the vines coiling around made her stomach churn. Diana had often ventured into the wilderness and witnessed demonic trees in action. They were one of the more common spirit trees populating the wild. The only difference between spirit trees and any other typical tree was the ability to cultivate very slowly. However, most spirit trees never made it into the soul fire realm as their wood could be harvested and turned into long-lasting tools for mortals and even cultivators if the spirit tree cultivated high enough. So Diana had never seen a strong spirit tree before as she never ventured too far from sect grounds. But even with her limited knowledge, she was certain demonic trees grew poisonous berries and slowly absorbed corpses around their roots by making the soil very acidic. Controlling vines that came out of the ground. Creating rifts to a demonic realm. Talking with its chi. These were powers reserved for sentient, thinking creatures. Or a world tree. Diana had heard tales of how before monarch realms ruled the world with their continent. Spanning empires, there was no chi and no cultivators. It wasn't until the world tree, that spanned the cosmos, with its roots infiltrating every world, was destroyed by the old gods that Chi could finally flourish and give rise to a vibrant and alive world. Now it may be small compared to the world tree described in the legends. But too many worrying signs were pointing to its future prowess. Its growth was ridiculous, and its sole core element was worrying. Spatial, of the highest grade. The lilac flames were so bright and pure that it was almost impossible. Everyone's soul was slightly tainted, unable to fully grasp an element's Tao. But the tree. It had somehow fully comprehended one of the rarest and most powerful elements. Diana glanced at her own dark blue flames, showing her meager talent in the element of water. To her side stood Stella. Her purple flames had died down. She also had a spatial element, but Diana could also detect lightning Tao. So how had Stella come into contact with the heavenly lightning when she was still in the soul fire realm? Diana had too many questions, and Stella's lips were firmly shut in a slight frown, and her eyes filled with worry. With a long sigh, Diana relaxed her soul core and deposited her sword in her spatial ring. We need to get stronger, Stella, if we want to protect the tree. Diana saw the girl's eyes widen as she turned to her. Diana was a little annoyed looking up to meet the younger girl's eyes, but she had never liked high heels, so this was the fate she had to suffer. Don't give me that look. I'm a demonic cultivator without a family name. If I cannot become a grand elder, my future is bleak, to say the least, and I have nowhere else to go. Sorry, Diana. Stella diverted her eyes, looking back at the tree. Don't trust me yet. Diana smiled sadly, that is perfectly understandable, and I have no right to pressure you for answers. But could you please tell your tree friend to avoid summoning stuff from rifts? If a merchant group is nearby, it will be the end for all of us. Stella nodded, absolutely. Thank you, Diana. Just give me some time, and we can work this out. Diana could only shrug at the girl's words. In a way, Diana respected how tight-lipped Stella could be, that was a good trait to have. Diana turned on her heel and walked with measured steps back to the dark training courtyard, a dagger materialized in her hand, and she spun it between her fingers as her mind wandered. What would become of this? Ashlock watched Diana leave, and once she was out of sight, he summoned his system to ensure he wasn't listed as a world tree seed. Demonic Spirit Tree, Age 8, Soul Fire. First Stage, Soul Core. Amethyst, Spatial, Summons. Ash Spider. Larry, C, Skills, Eye of the Tree God, A, Deep Roots, A, Language of the World, B, Lightning Chi Protection, B, Root Puppet, B, Transpiration of Heaven and Earth, C, Chi Fruit Production, C, Devour, C, Hibernate, C, Fire Chi Resistance, C, Basic Poison Resistance, F. Besides the new summons section that listed Larry, everything else was the same as usual. His race said Demonic Spirit Tree, and there was no evidence of him becoming a world tree. Hang on. His race had upgraded from sapling to tree when he ascended to the soul fire realm from the Chi realm. What could be higher than a spirit tree? World tree. Would it upgrade once he reached the next realm? And now that he looked at his soul core and skills, a spatial element for a tree didn't make a lot of sense, and he had skills like Eye of the Tree God and Language of the World. Aren't these abilities a world tree could have? They allowed him to see and understand everything within his realm of influence. Could he even understand beasts if they communicated near him? Even his cultivation technique was suspicious. Its description depicted him as the connection between heaven and earth, which wasn't far from a world tree's true purpose. Diana mentioned these secret realms formed because worlds drifted too close to one another and created an overlap. If I could get my roots through an overlap and anchor the worlds together, couldn't I become the bridge between worlds? Ashlock calmed down. He was getting way ahead of himself. Conquer Red Vine Peak first, then this sect filled with arseholes. Then the continent, the world, and only then can I become a world tree and span the cosmos. Until this point, Ashlock had been growing stronger for nothing but survival, but now he had an end goal. Mortals strove for immortality, but that had been pointless to him as an immortal tree. Becoming a world tree is a great end goal. Ashlock was almost daydreaming of how many credits he could harvest daily if his roots spread worldwide. Tree. An almost mouse-like voice broke him from his thoughts. Stella had approached him. Her eyes were different as she looked up at his expansive canopy that loomed overhead. The affection was held back by a mask of seriousness with her hands clenched at her sides. Ashlock flashed his lilac chi through a leaf to signal he was listening. He had thought of trying to spell words with his leaves, but they were too sparse to achieve such a thing. Stella just stood rooted in place as she watched the leaf flicker. Her mouth opened and closed as if she struggled to get the words out. Words that Ashlock was fearful of. Why was Stella acting in such a way? Had Diana's words shaken her? Did the knowledge that he might be a world tree break the illusion of a friendly tree she had in her mind? Ashlock's mind raced as Stella stood there. A while passed before Stella gathered the courage. Finally, she looked up and held her arms against her chest. Tree, I'm sorry. I'm so weak. Tears brimmed at the edge of the girl's eyes. As I am now. I can never hope to protect you against the whole world. I need to work harder. Train faster. Ashlock was speechless. Was this girl crazy? She wanted to fight the whole world. The thought of Stella fighting everyone for him had never even occurred. How could he put such pressure on a girl who isn't even an adult yet? She should just grow up happy under his canopy and let him handle the rest. Stella reached up to her earrings with one hand and clenched a black-handled dagger that Ashlock recognized with the other. You gave me so much, but I have nothing in return to offer. I will go train so I will not be a hindrance. She didn't even watch his leaves frantically flashing twice to indicate no. Instead, biting her lip, she turned and left to follow Diana. A fire that Ashlock had never seen before flared in her eyes, the fire of passion. Ashlock stopped trying to signal Stella and let her go. Although her motives for strength were twisted, the end result she aimed for was ideal. He needed her to be stronger, but not for himself. In a world where a man riding a mountain-sized ice golem can turn up unannounced, and a beast tide that can wipe out an entire sect can come by, there was no way he could guarantee her safety. At least for now. Don't worry, Stella. For I am also weak. Ashlock returned his attention to the pile of corpses and decided to cast, Devour, on the third pile. He was going all in for his next draw. The training courtyard was filled with shouts and clangs of swords as ambient chi radiated off their fierce fighting. Diana and Stella trained hard throughout the night without rest. Ashlock wished he could watch, but he had to focus on his meditation technique. There was a large amount of chi in the corpses, and he could feel himself touching the next stage of his realm. The path to becoming a world tree was long, but every bit of growth mattered. As the sun crested the horizon, signifying the start of a new day, Ashlock felt a rush of chi spread throughout his body, one he was familiar with. Plus 902 SC, Ashlock glanced briefly at the points. Those had been expected, but the rush meant something else. He quickly opened his status screen. Demonic Spirit Tree, Age 8, Soul Fire. Second Stage, Soul Core. Amethyst, Spatial. Sure enough, he was now at the second stage of the Soul Fire realm. He could already feel the changes. His perception range was increased, his trunk buzzed with power, and his mind felt clearer than ever. But the feeling faded soon enough, becoming the new norm. Once Ashlock had finished relishing in his new cultivation stage, he turned to the sign that IN system. I wonder if it could give me some more techniques for cultivation and chi usage. Until now, Ashlock couldn't only cultivate with his transpiration of heaven and earth technique, but actually throwing his chi around was beyond him. Knowledge about runic formations or arrays would also be useful. Ashlock could only pray that the Gotcha gods would listen to his plea. His system was beyond powerful. Given enough time, he would accumulate all the items, skills, and summons he could ever need. The only downside. It was randomized. Idle Tree Daily Sign.in System Day. 3150 Daily Credit. 1 Sacrifice Credit. 902. Sign in. Yes, sign in. Sign in successful, 903 credits consumed, upgraded, Chi Fruit Production, C. Chi Fruit Production, B. What? Ashlock glared at the notification. What was the difference? Why had it cost 903 credits to just raise the Chi Fruit Production up a grade? But then the knowledge the upgrade brought flooded his mind. He could now put seeds in the fruit, an option that had been missing from the menu before. Ashlock opened the menu with excitement, and sure enough, he could add a demonic tree seed into the fruit. It was time to build a forest of his own. Chapter 35. City Exploration. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ashlock hummed to himself as he could finally enjoy the pleasant autumn morning since the constant sound of fighting had ceased. Diana and Stella had taken a training break, and both passed out on the sandy training courtyard floor while gasping for breath in puddles of their own sweat. Stella's blonde hair was practically glued to her face, and Diana smiled as she rested. While the girls had fun training, Ashlock had spent the morning busy with his Chi Fruit Production menu. When Stella returned home, he'd planned to begin production of his fruit again as she would need food, and now with its increased grade providing him with a demonic tree seed option, he was excited. Ashlock hadn't been a tree expert back on Earth, but even he knew trees had two ways to reproduce. One was through seeds, which had evolved over millions of years on Earth, to be dispersed in every way possible, and the other was asexual reproduction, where the trees clone themselves through their roots. Can I clone myself? Ashlock knew for a tree to clone itself, it needed roots far away from its main body, and they needed to be in fertile soil. Otherwise, the cloned tree would steal resources from the original tree. But all my roots are stuck inside a mountain right now. Ashlock had been keeping an eye on his roots' progress through Redvine Peak. Ever since he gained a soul core, the progress had increased by over 10 times, and it wouldn't be long until he reached the mountain's base. Perhaps I can try to create a clone of myself once I reach the base. Or will I need a skill for that? Ashlock grumbled to himself as he thought of skills. They felt like features locked behind a paywall to him, which was frustrating, to say the least. Anyway, back to the seeds. Ashlock scrutinized the menu that floated in his mind. He clicked on the option to create a new fruit, and the user interface flickered as it brought up a blank space. Selecting the demonic tree seed, a dark red seed with black dots appeared floating in the menu. Now, how do I want this seed to be distributed? Wind, water, and even animals can bring seeds away from the original tree. Ashlock could try and create a way for his seeds to be dispersed by the wind, but just from a simple look around, he realized that wouldn't be possible. There simply wasn't any space for another tree to grow up here as he dominated the sky, and the pavilion took up most of the land. The walls would also trap the seeds so they couldn't escape to the ground thousands of meters below. Deciding an animal eating the seed was the best choice, Ashlock created a perfect dot-sized fruit for a bird and grew them on his uppermost branches. They were bright yellow, tasted sweet, and even had a little chi. But the majority of the fruit was the demonic tree seed. Then Ashlock added just a tad of poison that would be hard to detect over the fruit's sickly sweet smell and succulent soul fire realm chi. It would be bad if the bird went and deposited the seed too far from me, so poison is the way to go. Happy with his new fruit, Ashlock created a few more that didn't contain poison and others too big for a bird to take, so the girls had a fruit to eat. His grand plan was for birds to eat the poisonous ones, die an hour later, and then the demonic seed could use the bird's corpse as fuel to grow. I could also ask Stella and Diana to take some seeds with them when they go out to the wilderness again. Ashlock mulled but then shot down the idea. He couldn't even talk, so conveying such a complex idea would be impossible. The corpse he had left to the side for trying to communicate still lay there. However, looking at Stella and Diana's condition, Ashlock doubted they wished to wake up to a monster trying to communicate with them. Maybe Maple could take some seeds for me. Ashlock found the sleeping squirrel and decided against waking up the fur ball that had made Larry scramble away in fear. Oh yeah, Larry. Why don't I ask my new mind-controlled spider friend? Ashlock mentally focused on the black chi tether. It went in the direction of the town. Oh no. Ashlock was worried Larry had gone and feasted on some people, so he cast Eye of the Tree God and took to the skies. Instantly, he could feel the difference the single-dot stage increase had on his view range. The very edge of a new mountain peak became clear in the far distance on the other side of the town. Yeah, that is definitely not a town. The town devastated by the supernova was merely a slice of a sprawling city that filled up the valley. Even with his increased view range, Ashlock couldn't see the end of it. However, although it had been a year since the attack, Ashlock could still see large areas still wrecked. But the progress in reconstruction after only a year is impressive. Ashlock could see hundreds of men in brown robes lifting and hauling beams of wood, many times their size, over their shoulders, and Ashlock couldn't detect any chi from them. Mortals are that strong in this world. In a way, it made some sense. If a cultivator at the 9th stage of the chi realm could break a boulder in half with their bare fist, it only made sense that mortals who were eternally stuck at the 1st stage of the chi realm could still perform impressive feats. The ambient chi in the air seemed to affect all life on the planet. Ashlock had already noticed that plants grew faster than expected, so wouldn't that include crops? And if crops are filled with chi, wouldn't the mortals eating it absorb even a little chi every time? Ashlock had found it rather ridiculous how a civilization could sustain itself with superhumans running around, but if ambient chi made sickness rare and famine a near impossibility, wouldn't the world suffer from overpopulation instead? The vast city followed a similar theme as the part he had seen before. Chinese style pavilions flanked cobbled streets with people going about their daily business. However, Ashlock could feel a sense of tension in all the people as they went about their lives, something he had noticed when watching interviews of people living in war-torn countries back on Earth. Cultivators in snow-white and dark green robes wandered the streets as if they owned the place, pushing their way into stores and restaurants with their heads held high and hands clasped behind their backs. Ashlock noticed the main offenders were younger-looking cultivators who had apparently let their family's victory get to their heads. The occasional more senior cultivator would holler at them to act respectful to the mortals, but they would just run off like misbehaving kids. If there was one thing Ashlock hated, it was teenagers that thought they knew it all, so the whole thing left a sour taste in his mouth. After a few minutes, Ashlock found a particularly interesting pair heading toward the city's outskirts. Both were evergreen cultivators by their clothing, and they looked somewhat similar. Are all cultivators in a family related? In his brief overlook of the city, Ashlock found it hard to believe that he had counted hundreds, if not thousands, of cultivators roaming the streets of the vast city, and they were all part of just 2 families. As Ashlock was watching the cultivators walk, he saw a thin line of black chi. Larry. Ashlock raced along the line. It led him outside the bustling city and around the far side of the Reborn mountain. The sound of shouting and clanging of tools on stone filled the air. Is this a mine? Ashlock watched a stream of mortals coming out of an enormous hole built into the side of the mountain. Pickaxes and bags filled to the brim with silvery rock were in their hands as they marched in single file. A Winterrath cultivator with many spatial rings on his fingers stood to the side on a raised platform. A clipboard was in his hands, and he gave the man waiting before him a once-over with about as much enthusiasm as a store clerk from Ashlock's previous life. Name? The cultivator said with a sigh. Barry Yale. A large man at the front of the queue answered respectfully. The Winterrath cultivator held out his hand, and Barry handed him the sack filled with the silvery rock with a grunt due to its weight. The cultivator weighed the bag up and down effortlessly, and some white chi shrouded his hand. About 50 silver crowns worth of spirit stones. Next. The bag of spirit stones vanished from the cultivator's hands, and one of the many golden rings flashed with power before dimming. They are called spirit stones. Ashlock finally knew the name of that silvery rock found in his mountain. But how do they have so much? Each person here carries as many spirit stones as I find every 1,000 meters. Are there more spirit stones deeper down? Or is my mountain just deprived of resources? Ashlock felt he may have just stumbled upon the reason nobody cared for Red Vine Peak. Was it useless to the cultivators? Barry didn't move. Sir, under the Ravenborn family, that same bag fetched me 80 silver crowns at least. The Winterrath cultivator tilted his head and sneered, his scarlet eyes flashed with amusement. Mortal, don't make this harder than it has to be, all right. You and I both know how this world works. Barry gritted his teeth and opened his hand. The cultivator's ring flashed, and 50 small silver coins appeared, which Barry quickly pocketed with a scowl before stomping off. Next. Ashlock watched as Barry made his way to a pathway and chose to go right, which was the opposite way from the city. As Barry walked down the well-trodden path flanked by trees with golden-brown autumn leaves, Ashlock looked ahead and saw a vast wall in the distance. It was constructed of grey stone, and Ashlock could see cultivators wandering along its top as they looked out into the vast wilderness, likely for incoming beasts. Between the back of the mountain and the stone wall was an expansive land overflowing with fields, dense patches of forest, and the occasional village nestled in between, consisting of only a dozen houses. A river flowed down from one of the mountain peaks, making it a scenic view. There was just one problem. Barry was walking into a patch of dense forest, and Ashlock could see the black chi tether that led him to Larry. Using his skill to move on ahead, Ashlock saw up in the trees a few meters into the forest was Larry. The car-sized ash spider was happily building a network of webs throughout the patch of forest and munching on an animal's leg. Larry. What are you doing here so close to the humans? I told you to go hunt in the wilderness. Come back right now. Ashlock tried to speak with Larry through the tether, but the distance affected the message. Larry looked toward Red Vine Peak but tilted its head in confusion. I never told Larry what counted as a snack, did I? Ashlock watched in dread as Barry entered the forest, unaware of the monster lurking within. Ashlock was ready to declare Barry a dead man. But then he saw the two evergreen cultivators he had noticed earlier trailing not far behind and entering the forest only a moment after Barry. Now Ashlock was worried for Larry. Chapter 36. Evolution. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Barry could hear two men talking behind him, so he quickened his pace. He could tell they were cultivators from their conversation and way of speaking, and after being scammed by a Winterrath bastard back at the mines. The last thing Barry wanted right now was to be robbed in the middle of a forest for his few silver crowns. Barry rounded a corner in the path, but he could still hear them loudly talking. Hey John, did I tell you an elder informed me that Evergreen Peak had fallen to the Voidmind family earlier this morning? Barry then heard the other man chuckle. Well, that was only to be expected with our grand elder away from home, not like it matters anyways. Any news on Winterrath's old peak? I guess it doesn't matter since it's all mined out, but it still stings, you know. The Voidmind family is so small that losing to them feels like an insult. The cultivator loudly sighed. As for news on Winterworth's peak, only some rumors, but I think Redclaw have their eyes set on it. As Barry hastened his pace, he was only half listening to the cultivator's talk. Just like all mortals, he hated everything about cultivator politics. Barry had been born in the Blood Lotus sect 5,000 miles from here, near the Frostlands, and the same exact thing had happened back then when he was a child. A sudden change in leadership, rampant wars, and a reduction in earnings. It was all signs of an incoming beast tide. Barry remembered his parents arguing at the dinner table about how they couldn't afford the ticket aboard the airship to the new sect as the beast tide was coming. Barry thought about how his father had stayed behind because he hadn't saved up enough, and the ticket's price doubled last second. He still vividly remembered clutching the railings of the airship's deck with his tiny hands and looking down at a sea of people left behind, including his father. The old man had been waving to him with tears in his eyes while Barry's mother silently wept at his side. His 5 brothers and sisters that were older had consoled his mother while he had just started in shock. At the time, Barry hadn't understood all the fuss about this beast tide, but as he'd cast his gaze to the horizon, it was pitch black. Then, as it got closer, Barry saw that it wasn't just a wave of nothingness but a dense collection of beasts. The old Blood Lotus sect was swarming with beasts within the hour, but they were far away by then. Barry gritted his teeth as he kept marching on. He wouldn't let his family face the same fate. Barry silently swore he would mine for 20 hours a day if he had to. There was no way he would let his large family become fragmented due to the cultivators' greed. Why couldn't they just build more airships? Or take more people? Bastards, the lot of them. Silence. Barry's steps slowed. The cultivators had stopped talking as he had been lost in his thoughts. He cast a glance over his shoulder, but there was nothing. Weren't they right behind me? A breeze went by, rustling the golden leaves of the forest. An eerie silence sent a shiver down his spine. Barry stopped for an entire minute, but the cultivators never caught up to him. Is there another path through the forest? I assumed they were heading to the wall for guard duty. Barry loathed cultivators, just like everyone else. But he hated cultivators that slacked off from their jobs even more. Especially with the sudden change in leadership, Barry had recently noticed a disturbing lack of guards on the walls and didn't feel his family was safe. In response to this, the elders of Winterrath and Evergreen had offered a monetary reward if a villager reported any incidents of younger cultivators slacking on their duty. Barry paid taxes, after all, and deserved some level of protection. If a monster snuck up on the wall and jumped over, the villagers would be helpless to resist it. Only a cultivator has the strength to fight off a beast from the wilderness. Useless bastards, Barry muttered as he strode back down the path. He planned to catch a glimpse of their faces, so he had some details to describe to an elder so he could collect the reward money. The golden leaves that had covered the path crunched underfoot as he walked. He looked left and right, scrutinizing the surroundings for a sign of the cultivators. Nothing. Barry scratched his head in confusion as he saw the entrance to the forest he had entered just minutes ago. Had they really just turned around and left? Barry was about to go back, but something caught the corner of his eye. A blood-stained leaf. Barry approached it and picked it up, twirling it in his hand. He found it odd that there was just one leaf with blood on it, and then something dripped onto it. Water droplet. Has it even rained? Barry inspected the droplet and noticed it was scarlet. Blood. Barry froze as another drop of blood hit the leaf. He slowly looked up as he heard a branch creak. A large shadow moved, and 8 red eyes the size of dinner plates glared at him from above. It was quietly chewing, and Barry could see 4 legs sticking out from the monster's mouth. As his eyes wandered from the beast's face, he could see the vague outline of legs that were longer than he was tall. The memories of that beast tide flashed through his mind. Is this what his father had seen before his death? Hundreds of thousands of monsters like this surging over the frozen plains at a speed no mere mortal could hope to match. Barry slowly walked backward, one step at a time, never breaking eye contact. He winced as the crisp leaves crunched underfoot. As he backed up and got more of the picture, he could tell the monster was definitely some kind of ash-colored spider, but it was bigger than any boar he had ever seen. The spider kept happily munching on the cultivators without showing any sign of moving. Barry could feel the sun's warmth on his back. The exit was near, was it letting him go? Ashlock watched everything from the sky. Listening to the cultivator's conversation taught him more about the beast tides and their destructive power. Currently, the incoming beast tide was Ashlock's greatest concern, as being a tree limited his options for running away. I need to work harder on my deep roots and creating tunnels throughout the mountain. Ashlock had focused some of his resources on his roots, but he had been more focused on furthering his cultivation recently and trying to communicate. I wish someone would mention how long a time scale I am working with here. Is the beast tide coming this year? Next year? I have no idea. Ashlock focused back on the situation occurring 2 mountain peaks away. The car-sized spider had seemed uninterested in Barry and let him pass below peacefully. Ashlock wondered why. Was it because he was a mortal without chi? Did Larry not even see the man as a worthy snack? Ashlock knew he had very gray morals when it came to death. His human mind had lacked empathy in the first place, and now after becoming a tree, they were dulled even further. However, Ashlock would feel bad if Larry ate the dude. Good job, Larry. Ashlock knew the spider couldn't hear him, but maybe the emotion would get across. Now eat those cultivators. Some may call Ashlock a hypocrite, but he disliked cultivators for a simple reason. They were all a threat to him. No matter how hard they tried, mortals wouldn't be able to chop him down, whereas a cultivator could annihilate him with a single ability if they were powerful enough, like the Grand Elders. If the beast tide came and wiped all the cultivators out while leaving him alone, that would be ideal. Ashlock had long accepted that this was a dog-eat dog world where the ones with power killed each other for more. He just felt the mortals going about their daily lives should be left out of the conflict, and therefore he would feel bad if Larry went around slaughtering random villagers. Ashlock watched as the 2 talking cultivators entered the forest. Larry seemed interested as he slowly crept along the branches toward them like a stalking cat. Luckily, both were too busy talking to each other to notice the monstrosity above them. Do they not have a spiritual sense? Ashlock was used to cultivators having extraordinary senses of their surroundings. How could they not notice Larry right above them? Both of them stopped talking at the same time and looked up. Now Ashlock had wondered what the possible evolutionary advantage to being such a massive spider could be. But now he had his answer. Since Larry was the size of a car, his mouth easily engulfed the 2 men's bodies and crunched down. The 2 evergreen cultivators didn't even have a chance to fight back before they were chomped in half and dragged back up into the canopy of the trees. Apart from a short gasp and a crunch, the entire thing was done in complete silence. Ashlock then saw Barry come back and, after picking up a blood-soaked leaf, came face to face with Larry. As Ashlock expected, the giant spider didn't even care about Barry, not seeing him as a threat or a potential meal. Larry, you know humans are social creatures, right? So if you let that dude go, he will return with many cultivators. Alas, Larry couldn't hear him and seemed to lack the intelligence to recognize that letting such an insignificant prey escape was a terrible idea. A day passed, and Ashlock decided to eat his words. Larry wasn't foolish. In fact, the spider was a tactical genius. After munching on a few more cultivators that came to investigate the patch of forest, Larry had bundled a few bodies up in silk and happily moved on to the next patch of forest. Never staying in one area for too long. He always let villagers see him and then let them escape, alerting the cultivators, which then came to the forest to die. However, Larry was far from weak. Even when caught out due to larger groups, he could summon a storm of ash that blanketed the entire area and disrupted formations, just like Diana's mist ability. Which he then used to assassinate the cultivators one by one. After a week, Larry finally decided to head home to Red Vine Peak, likely before he got too ahead of himself and the actual powerful cultivators came. The spider hauled a sack of silk on its back containing around 10 bodies, and it scared the shit out of Diana when it peeked its head through the hole in the training wall. Holy shit, that thing is back. Diana shouted as she raised the blade she had been practicing with. Ashlock swore he saw Larry roll his many eyes as he just walked past Diana, climbed over the wall, and sat happily on Ashlock's branches. "Larry, are those bodies for me?" Ashlock asked the spider through the tether of black chi, and the spider responded by lowering the sack of bodies to the ground right next to the bench that Stella was sleeping on. Ashlock was over the moon to finally have some human corpses to experiment with, but Larry did something he wasn't expecting. The spider climbed over his branches and perched himself up against his trunk, and then a prompt appeared in Ashlock's mind. Ash Spider, Larry, wishes to evolve. Chapter 37. A tree's first words. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ash Spider, Larry, wishes to evolve, yes/no. The answer was obviously yes, but Ashlock also found his level of control over the Ash Spider a bit unsettling. In a way, he preferred his relationship with Maple. Although the little bastard wouldn't listen to his every whim, he felt he could depend on Maple to save him if he were in danger. In contrast, Larry reminded Ashlock of an intelligent AI. If Ashlock was dying and unable to order Larry to save him, Ashlock was positive the spider would watch as he died without lifting a leg. The spider may eat and breathe, but Larry didn't feel alive to Ashlock. But what could Ashlock do? Setting the spider free from his control was a terrible idea. At only the C grade, the monster had slaughtered cultivators with the ruthless efficiency of a top predator. The cultivators weren't dumb. They had attempted a variety of tactics to deal with the spider, but limited information and its constant moving made it hard to pin Larry down and determine its threat level. Stronger cultivators were naturally dispatched after around 30 kills, but Larry was long gone by then with a bundle of corpses on his back for his master. After Ashlock pressed, yes, Larry began to weave a lair out of webs between Ashlock's branches, much to Stella's protests. "Tree. Tell that creepy thing to go away." Stella crossed her arms under her chest and glared at the massive shadow blocking out the sun so she couldn't continue sunbathing. Her eyes then wandered to the sack of silk next to her. "What's in here? It reeks." "Ugh." Stella summoned a knife from her spatial ring, crouched down, and sliced the sack open. A man's half-eaten face stared back at her with wide-open eyes as if the man had died while in total shock. "Ack." Stella stumbled back while holding her nose. "That's disgusting." Ashlock had to agree. Even with his dulled emotions and detachment from gruesome scenes, it looked like something out of a crime scene. Luckily, as a tree, he had no sense of smell, but if Stella's face of absolute disgust was anything to go by, the sack of decomposing human corpses was far from pleasant. Unfortunately for Stella, Ashlock had a plan for these bodies. Using Devour on them would net him some credits, but he felt it would be easier to try communication with a human body. Since Diana and Stella had been so busy training, Ashlock had been unable to resist and had eaten the last monster corpse for 20 credits, so now the only bodies he had access to were these human corpses. While Larry was fussing about with his new lair of webs, Ashlock activated Root Puppet on the exposed corpse. Stella winced as a black root snuck up from the ground and inserted through the corpse's ajar mouth. Ashlock felt Stella's reaction to the whole thing rather amusing, considering she had slaughtered so many people from a young age. Ashlock thought she would be used to seeing corpses. Actually, now that Ashlock thought about it. Since Stella always fed the corpses to him, she had never seen a decomposed corpse before. Diana strolled into the courtyard and gave a lukewarm reaction to the gruesome scene. Human corpses. Her eyes narrowed on the black root, and that puppet ability again. It took a few minutes, but the silk bag of corpses eventually began to shudder as Ashlock tried to move the root puppet. "This corpse has a soul core, but it's weaker than mine." This guy was a freshly promoted soul fire cultivator at the first stage. What a sad fate. Ashlock could already feel the corpse's soul core starting to crack. If he could get hold of a high-stage cultivator, it could last longer than a few minutes, but alas, his skill wasn't kind on the corpses. Why can't the system give me necromancy? That would be so much better. However, Ashlock had to admit that being able to project his own cultivation through the puppet, turning it into a suicide bomber, did give him a very effective method of attacking, so long as a spare corpse was nearby. If I got hold of a star core cultivator like the Grand Elder, could I use Root Puppet to make it go supernova? Or would I also need to be in the star core realm to do that? Ashlock wasn't sure, but if he could cause an explosion like that inside a beast tide, wouldn't he get an ungodly amount of credits? Ashlock diverted his attention back to the corpse, pushing a little of his cultivation into the body. His lilac flames coated its hands, and the male corpse climbed out of its cocoon with jittery movements that made it look like a zombie from a crappy movie. Right, time to communicate. Ashlock made the corpse stand there and open its mouth, but all that came from it was a wheeze, foul-smelling air, and some fluid dripping from its chin. Ashlock tried again, but he discovered the issue. The corpse had its vocal cords and lungs, but he didn't know how to make it talk. Controlling limbs is easy enough, although the jittery movements betrayed his level of control as being rather poor, but to manually adjust the corpse's tongue, vocal cords, and lungs all to simulate speech. Impossible without a lot of practice. But Ashlock wanted to communicate today, not years later when he had perfected the art of corpse speech. I could play charades with the corpse. But what do I even want to say? Ashlock didn't want his first impression to be him making a corpse dance and randomly pointing at things. There were naturally many things Ashlock wanted to tell Stella. They had been side by side for years, and he had been nothing but a spectator and listener, never able to console or offer solutions to the distraught girl. Ashlock finally had a chance to change that. If only he could communicate. The corpse clawed at its face in frustration. There had to be a way to convey thoughts. Ashlock looked at the pristine white wall of the pavilion, and an idea crossed his mind. The puppet shuffled across the courtyard with trembling feet, and Stella gave it a wide breath as if it was cursed or diseased. Ashlock made it slash its fingertip on a sharp bit of the runic formation that was jutting out of the ground, drawing blood. The corpse stood motionlessly before the canvas like a deer caught in headlights, clotted blood dripping from its finger. There was an uncomfortable silence as Ashlock's mind blanked. What should be his first words? Stella and Diana looked on curiously from a distance, neither willing to get too close. Having come to a decision, Ashlock made the corpse raise its trembling finger, and with as much precision as possible, he spelled out a simple message. I am Ashlock. The corpse burst into lilac flames as its weak soul core shattered. Ashlock released his control and let the flaming corpse tumble to the side before its blood-stained message. Not willing to waste the corpse, Ashlock cast Devour, and vines erupted from the floor, encasing the burning body. Stella seemed grateful that Ashlock was disposing of the body as she nodded to him and walked past the slithering vines, and with Diana by her side, she inspected the words. Ashlock waited nervously. He had never seen what text looked like in this world. Could they even read? Did he write in their language? What if they thought his name was stupid? Should he have said something more mysterious? Can you read this, Diana? Stella tilted her head, and Ashlock felt his non-existent heart stop. Had he just written rubbish on the wall? Did they think he was stupid? I should have drawn a picture. Darn it, Ashlock grumbled. Now that he looked at the words the corpse had written, it wasn't any language he was familiar with back on Earth, just a bunch of scribbles. How had he known how to write this weird script that looked so similar to runes? Diana said, I think these are runes. But ancient ones. We could go find a specialist to decipher them. No, we need a teacher. Stella retorted. Why? Diana scrunched her brows in confusion. Stella tilted her head like it was a stupid question, obviously, so I can write tree letters when I leave the sect to train. She then pointed to the blood-stained wall, and so I can understand whatever tree writes anytime. Diana rolled her eyes and muttered, oh yeah. Obviously. How did I not think of that? Stella practically ran past Diana toward the pavilion entrance. Come on, Diana, we have no time to waste. Diana caught up to the excited girl while putting on a black cloak with a hood and a white mask to hide her appearance, as most Ravenborn cultivators had the same distinct black hair and gray eyes. Ashlock watched them go and couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Plus 20 SC, oh, the corpse was absorbed. Ashlock looked at the silk sack and debated casting Devour on them but decided against it. Instead, he would save them for when the rune translator arrived. Then, he could speak to them some more. I got one sentence out of that corpse, and I have 9 corpses left, so 1 line per corpse. Ashlock's mind wandered about what to say in those 9 lines when a pop-up almost startled him. Ash Spider, Larry, has begun to evolve. Please select, Larry, Evolution Path. Colossal Ash Spider. Colossal ash spiders are known to inhabit the molten plains. Their size is comparable to an adolescent fire drake, and armor plates coat their head, abdomen, and legs, making them walking tanks that can fight toe-to-toe with the demonic realm's most fearsome brutes. Hell no, Ashlock said as he glanced at the silk sack hanging from his branch. It was so heavy Ashlock's wood was creaking, and the sack looked like it could contain a grand piano. Larry's size had proven useful, but it would eventually become a detriment. With the addition of armored plates, the spider would naturally be slower and struggle to sneak silently across the canopies of the forests. In addition, this option would limit Larry's to being a front-line tank, which Ashlock didn't need right now. Ashen Prince, an ash spider queen will give birth to thousands of offspring throughout their lives, but only one can be deemed the prince of the spiderlings. The Ashen Prince has no outstanding qualities over his siblings other than inheriting their mother's deep understanding of the Tao of Ash. Ashlock liked the sound of this one. Not only due to the royal title, but in a world of cultivation, nothing was more important than understanding the Tao. With a deep understanding of one's Tao, a cultivator has unlimited potential. Larry had also used his limited ash techniques a few times to survive a trap by the cultivators, and the one thing Ashlock wanted was for Larry to survive. Chaos Spider. Chaos spiders thrive from slaughter and become stronger with every kill by devouring the souls of their opponents. Although this path leads to immense power very quickly, chaos spiders quickly embrace the mad hunger of the hunt. Ashlock rolled his non-existent eyes. He may be a demonic tree, but he was no stranger to the up and downsides of demonic cultivation techniques. Anything that promises quick results and unlimited power will have an equal downside, such as losing sanity. He already had iffy control over Larry at long distances. The last thing Ashlock needed was the spider going on a warpath and killing everyone, just for an enraged Grand Elder to squash Larry like a bug. The spider had only lived so long because of his cunning nature, not brute strength. I think the option to pick is obvious. Ashlock naturally picked Ashen Prince, but the other options would have been better if he were under different circumstances, like the Chaos Spider, would be perfect in the Beast Tide. But for the long term, Ashen Prince was the way to go. Evolution Path, Ashen Prince, chosen, evolution initiating. Chapter 38. Interlude, Head Librarian. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Stella's soul core buzzed with glee, purple flames coated her legs, and lightning arched across her skin as she saw the mountain blur beneath her feet. She breathed deeply to calm herself as the wind rushed through her hair. I can't believe Tree can write. We will be able to talk about all the things I always wanted to ask. Stella, wait up. The blonde girl had a silly grin and really wanted to ignore the voice coming from behind, but that would be rude, so she came to a halt at the mountain's base and looked back up the endless steps with her hands on her hips. Diana, why are you so slow? A ball of blue flames arrived next to her and dissipated, revealing a girl wearing a black cloak and white mask. Stella raised a brow. What's with the getup? Diana's turned to Stella and looked at her with a faceless mask that was a white piece of curved wood with 2 eye holes. Something you should be wearing too. The remnants of my family are being hunted, so naturally, I need to hide my identity. Right. Stella frowned, but why would I need to hide mine? I have the patriarch's protection. Otherwise, my peak would have been taken from me long ago. Her gaze wandered the mountain and settled warmly on the pavilion nestled in the clouds. To her, it was not just a paradise but also her home. Diana's irritated huff broke Stella from her dreamland. Stella, listen to me. Diana insisted, her tone turning solemn, they have lied to you your entire life. The patriarch is a 1,000-year-old monster in human form. He doesn't give a shit about repaying any kind of debt for saving him. Diana sighed and pointed at Stella, he just wants your body. Stella just stood there, blinking. My what? Body. She covered herself and felt a shiver run down her spine. Why? Is he a creep? Diana shook her head, nope, he just needs a pill furnace to create a pill that extends his life. Stella looked confused, so Diana helpfully added, being a human pill furnace means he will conduct alchemy within your stomach and use your spirit root, soul core, and chi as part of the pill-forming process. Stella paled and stood there for a while, processing everything. Diana gave her some space and idly stood to the side. Eventually, Stella mumbled, I see. So my time is limited then. Stella clenched her fists and looked down the beaten path that led to the sprawling dark-light city in the far distance. Diana, give me a mask. Let's hurry. Diana's spatial ring flashed with power, and a faceless black mask appeared in her waiting hand. Here. Stella nodded with thanks and put the mask on. To her surprise, it had no straps and easily stayed glued to her face. It also didn't impede her vision, as if it wasn't even there. She reached up and felt her face, confirming a wooden texture had replaced her smooth skin. Now that is freaky. Diana had already started racing down the path, her black cloak coated in blue flames fluttering in the wind behind her. Stella grinned as purple lightning arced between her feet, and she caught up in an instant as her soul core hummed. Why are the streets so empty? Stella whispered to Diana as the two girls walked side by side down an empty street. Windows were shuttered closed, and the only living things Stella could see were black-furred cats prowling across the slanted roofs, glaring at the pair with yellow eyes. Diana tapped her chin as she glanced around. She made sure to scrutinize every empty alley they passed. Was there an attack? I haven't been down here since the Reborn family was eliminated, but life should have returned to normal by now. But I have another question. Stella tilted her head, which is? Why is there a squirrel on your head? Pausing mid-stride, Stella reached up, and sure enough, a little hand grabbed her finger and demanded head rubs. Oh, when did you get here, Maple? Did you get bored waiting with Tree? That doesn't answer my question. Diana pouted to the side. Shoo. Stella put a finger to where her mouth was behind the faceless black mask, fewer questions, more walking. And with that, Stella continued to stride forward. Diana rolled her eyes, fine, no more questions. Then, running to catch up, Diana put her hands in her cloak pockets and continued, we should head to the Academy's library. I can't think where we could get an ancient rune teacher anywhere else. Emicham. Stella hummed in agreement as she finished giving Maple attention, and the fluffy white squirrel sprawled out on Stella's head and happily bathed in the sun. Turning a corner and crossing a bridge over a fast-flowing river through the city's center, Stella and Diana arrived at one of the many market squares. Stella's eyes practically lit up at the sight of humans milling about and purchasing goods. Strolling up to a stall and ignoring the questioning glare the stall owner gave to the top of her head, Stella asked, excuse me, could you tell me why the city is so empty? Wearing masks and letting a rodent sleep on your head. The stall owner, an absolute beefcake of a woman, shooed Stella off, don't come here and bring trouble. You will scare off my customers. The woman let out a long sigh, or at least the ones still brave enough to walk the streets after the massacre out in the villages just a few minutes' walk from here. Massacre. Diana quipped in from the side, of villagers or cultivators. Cultivators. Which makes it all the more concerning. The woman crossed her sizable arms and continued to gossip. A monster suddenly appeared a week ago and has been eating cultivators ever since. They named it the Ashen Devourer, and apparently, it is a spider the size of a house that can summon ash storms. The woman then scowled at them, so be careful when walking around here, and if you aren't going to buy something, then move along. Stella and Diana exchanged a glance. Both had a rough idea of who this Ashen Devourer could be. Tree has caused quite a fuss with his pet, it seems. Diana whistled to herself as they turned onto the street that ended with Darklight's most famous academy. Spires of white stone reached for the clouds that lazily went by, and despite the desolate streets, many students were walking around up ahead in energetic groups. A few students walked by and gave Stella and Diana odd looks as they passed. Stella heard someone laugh behind them as they were about to walk through the academy's gates. "Hey, look, there's something on that weird girl's head." Then, a random lady within a large group of students pointed out, "Are they lost students from an orphanage? Look at their clothes. How filthy." Stella paused and glanced over her shoulder, and unfortunately, she had to admit the lady's clothes were in far better condition than hers. Stella hadn't bought a new cloak in years, and she hadn't even bothered cleaning hers after returning from the wilderness. It was torn in places and practically dyed red from blood. Diana's were in a slightly better but still terrible condition, likely due to them being artifacts and having chi naturally imbued into their materials. Stella cursed under her breath and continued forward. Little did she know Maple was watching the lady student leave with one eye lazily open, and as the student rounded the corner, she collapsed as there was a shudder in the void, and her soul core suddenly shattered. Maple closed his eye and enjoyed the distant screams. "Diana, once we figure this all out, we are going clothes shopping, okay?" Stella grumbled as they approached the academy's library. Like everything else in the academy, the building was constructed from a white stone that starkly contrasted the dull tones of Darklight City. Engraved into the white stone was a majestic tapestry of silver. As with all important buildings, the academy had installed a defensive formation using runic lines woven into the stone to protect the structure from any stray attacks from a cultivator. Diana hummed in agreement with Stella's proposition and tilted her head upwards, making a count of the various cultivators patrolling the roof. They eyed Stella and Diana wearily, but it was far better to be a little suspicious looking rather than outright recognized as a Ravenborn. Many of the family's scions walked around campus in disguises to avoid trouble, so everyone was apprehensive about questioning their motives, unless they made trouble. Diana had frequented the academy and only graduated a few years ago, so she knew the grounds. She practically led Stella by the hand into the library, a place Stella had visited a few times in the past, but she hadn't been a regular visitor for years. The library was a large oval building, like an opera theater, with 5 stories of books lining the walls. Grand marble staircases led between the floors, and the fresh scent of books accompanied the quiet chatter between disciples studying around desks stacked with books. As Diana and Stella awkwardly made their way to the top floor, there was not a single speck of dust coating anything. The library was spotless, just the way the head librarian liked it. Stella caught sight of a gray-robed individual using an artifact called a sponge to wipe down surfaces alongside a bucket of warm water, likely as punishment for damaging a book. Diana let out a sigh of relief as they crested the top of the final staircase and caught sight of a man with a straggly white beard and wispy hair. The man had a hunched stature as he sat before a mountain of books piled high on an illuminated desk. Indecipherable mutterings left the man's mouth as he licked his spindly finger and turned a page. The sound of the crisp page turn was interrupted by Diana lightly coughing. The elderly man looked up from his book and glared at the person who interrupted him with eyes of total darkness. A twisted scowl formed on his wrinkled face as he slammed both palms down and stood up. "Who dares interrupt me?" 2 measly assassins. Dense black flames as dark as the void materialized on his fingers like claws. Diana and Stella exchanged glances and quickly realized the source of the confusion. Stella hastily removed her mask before she got decapitated, as hiding her identity wasn't as crucial as concealing Diana's. Wait. Stella held her hands up. It's me, Stella crestfallen of Red Vine Peak. The man seemed lost in thought for a moment, but then the name seemed to ring a bell. The flames vanished from the man's hands, and he slumped back down into his rickety chair, pulling it closer under himself with a grunt. Ah, the crestfallen brat. He shook his head from side to side as if he had heard something terribly sad, come to bother this old man in your final years. Head librarian, does everyone know about that except me? Stella realized she should have left the peak a bit more and mingled with the people. Now that she thought about it, the last time she had left Red Vine Peak to talk to other people was years ago. The man waved his hand and shook his head. No, but it has been making the rounds recently. Now. He leaned on the desk and scowled at Stella. Tell me what you want so I can get back to my research and be snappy with it. As excitement returned, Stella took a step forward. I want to learn ancient runes. I stumbled upon some recently and wished to translate them. Ancient runes. The man leaned back and stroked his miserable excuse for a beard. Brat, how ancient are we talking here? Everyone thinks everything is ancient nowadays. These foolish children come bringing me their family's ancient techniques from 1,000 years ago, and I find out I'm the one who wrote it. Does that make me ancient? Yes, was on the tip of Stella's tongue, but she held back. Instead, she offered, I could draw the runes I saw for you. You memorized them. Clever girl. The head librarian's golden ring flashed, and a piece of paper appeared alongside an inkwell. Write it down. Stella complied. She had practically burned the squiggles into her mind. There was no chance she could forget even a single curve of her tree's first words. As Stella recreated the script written in blood on the pavilion walls, the quill moved with elegance and speed. Tree's first words. Passing the paper dripping in fresh ink to the head librarian, Stella felt her heart beat loudly in her chest. Anticipation and dread ate away at her like a plague, and time seemed to slow as the old man scrutinized her work. After what felt like an eternity to Stella, the elderly man scratched his head before turning to look at Stella inquisitively with his black eyes. This is an ancient script indeed, one from before my time. Luckily, it doesn't have missing parts, making this very easy to read. So. Stella leaned forward. What does it say? I am Ashlock. The head librarian frowned, but who the hell is Ashlock? Chapter 39. Baby Tree, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Idle Tree Daily Sign.in System Day. 3165 Daily Credit. 15 Sacrifice Credit. 20 Sign In. It's been a week since Stella and Diana left, Ashlock said to nobody in particular as he ignored the system message. Even Maple had gone with the girls and left him all alone. Ashlock looked around the courtyard, which was deathly silent except for the buzzing of flies around the open silk sack of human corpses lying next to his trunk. Once again, Ashlock felt blessed for his lack of smell because having rotting corpses so close by would be a nightmare. However, although he couldn't smell the bodies, resisting the hunger and desire to consume was hard. He was in a constant battle with himself. On the one hand, the corpses were decomposing, so they would make for crappy root puppets anyway, and with every passing second, the little flesh left on them was losing their chi which he could consume for sacrifice credits. A few hours passed with nothing happening. Ashlock distracted his mind by focusing on cultivation, but with the ambient chi from the Grand Elder's supernova gone, and the runic formation surrounding him damaged, it felt like a lukewarm jacuzzi rather than a lovely hot one. It was simply unsatisfying and slower than usual. Letting out a long sigh, he stopped cultivating. It almost felt pointless to focus so much of his mental energy on, as eating corpses was far more efficient for Ashlock. Darn demonic cultivation technique. No wonder those cultivators go insane. If I had to choose between sitting cross-legged in a cold cave for months to cultivate or eating a beast core, how are those two options comparable? Ashlock was yet to see a truly powerful demonic cultivator lose their sanity, but he could see how it could happen. Ashlock cast his spiritual sight to the heavy blob of silk suspended from his branches. Over the last few days, the silk had transitioned from white to a dull gray, like ash. He was excited to see how his first summon's evolution would turn out. Had he made the correct choice? Would a chaos spider have been better? His thoughts wandered as he looked around the courtyard some more. The place was honestly a dump. The once pristine white stone walls of the Red Vine Pavilion were now coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. Some of the slanted roof's black wooden tiles had blown away in the wind or been scorched by the Grand Elder's attack. The central courtyard was in a terrible state. Blood smeared the wrecked runic formation surrounding Ashlock alongside bits of cloth and monster parts left over from his meals. The training courtyard looked like a war had been fought, and the other courtyards weren't much better. The herb garden was overgrown with weeds overshadowing the more delicate plants, causing them to wither and die due to a lack of sunlight, and the smallest courtyard with a large pond had a few dead koi fish floating around. Out of all the courtyards, only the one with a mini runic formation that Stella used to meditate was in a somewhat okay condition. Now Ashlock was no clean freak, even if he had been. Becoming a tree changed his opinion on some things. But honestly, something needed to change around here. The girls required servants as they were hopeless at cleaning and looking after themselves. Ashlock's irritated thoughts were interrupted by a loud thump and a sudden relief of pressure on his branch. Evolution of Ashen Prince, Larry, complete. Larry looked as majestic as ever, and the system hadn't lied. He looked almost the same, but his presence in the surroundings was far more significant. The increased understanding of the Tao seemed to reflect on the spider's soul core stage. The enormous spider that stood a few meters tall stayed motionless, likely awaiting a command from Ashlock. As the spider was now B-grade, Ashlock feared what level of destruction he could cause the Winterwrath and Evergreen families. But do I poke the hornet's nest? Ashlock wanted bodies for communication, more sacrifice credits to further his cultivation. And if he let Larry wreak havoc and eat as many bodies as he wants, he could reach A grade. The two families are likely on high alert right now, scouring the forest for the spider. Larry, go out into the wilderness beyond the sect and hunt monsters for a month. Then, come back here with some monster corpses for me. Larry complied, and the car-sized spider scuttled off in the direction of the wilderness. Ashlock decided this was the best course of action. If he sent Larry to kill cultivators so soon, a Grand Elder may come along and eliminate Larry for good. On the other hand, by waiting a month, their alertness for Larry will die down, and Larry may even reach the A grade in a month and can then contend with the stronger cultivators. With Larry gone, silence once again returned to the courtyard. Moments like this reminded Ashlock of why he kept the girls around. He was glad that Stella had recently become somewhat friends with Diana, as their conversations livened the place up. Ugh! Whoever thought putting a human mind in a tree was a good idea was a sick bastard. Everything about a tree was slow and lonely, but luckily he knew that would change over time. One day this peak will become home to new people, and he will have lots of people to interact with by using corpses to draw on the walls or flashing his leaves with his chi. Maybe I should teach them Morse code somehow, or something similar. I could create tree code. Another week passed by. Ashlock was starting to wonder what Stella and Diana were up to. He had used his Eye of the Tree God skill and never caught sight of them anywhere in the city, or at least the part he could see. Unfortunately, the bundle of corpses had become maggot-infested, and not much of the original humans remained. Deciding to cut his losses, Ashlock cast Devour. +1 SC, wow. Only 1 credit. Even with the corpse's condition, Ashlock felt only 1 credit was low. Had all of the corpses' chi-filled meat been eaten? Were their bones worth nothing? Now he regretted holding on to the bodies for so long. I should have eaten them and asked Larry to get me more. Darn it. Luckily his fresh yellow fruits containing a demonic tree seed had grown enough to interest some birds. A blue and black feathered bird landed on his branch and looked curiously at the fruit. Unfortunately, the bird seemed to detect the subtle poison in the fruit as it refused to bite. Before the bird could fly away, Ashlock surged some chi through his branch, which lit it up with purple flames, and before the bird could even react, the fire of Ashlock's soul core burned the bird alive. Its scorched corpse tumbled to the side and hit the ground with a dull thump. Holy shit. Ashlock just looked at the corpse for a while. The only other time he'd managed to kill birds was once accidentally with lightning that was still arcing between his branches after he resisted lightning strikes, and the other was when a bird found his fruit so sour it knocked its head. Both were accidents. But this time, he had actually succeeded in killing something with chi on purpose. After 8 years of cultivating, Ashlock finally felt like an accomplished cultivator. Casting Devour on the bird's corpse gave him a familiar notification. +1 SC, Ashlock mentally frowned as he watched the black vines retreat into the ground. Only 1 point again. Sure, the bird was small, but I remember getting more than that before. Now that he thought about it, his points had been lower for weaker things since ascending to the soul fire realm. The mountain of monster corpses had given him around about what he expected, but they were powerful monsters from the wilderness. In contrast, the cultivators and birds he had eaten that were on par or weaker than him had given far fewer sacrifice credits than expected. A terrible thought dawned on Ashlock. When he devoured a corpse, he would absorb some of their chi, and the system would reward him with credits he could spend. But as his cultivation advanced, the amount of chi he needed to absorb to continue growing increased exponentially. Now, if this was the case and the number of sacrifice credits he got from weaker corpses than him continued to decrease, he had 2 options. Either he got Larry, Stella, and Diana to keep bringing him stronger and stronger corpses, or he lucked out and upgraded his Devour skill. Sigh. My dreams of creating a continent-sized chicken farm and endlessly devouring corpses has been ruined. Ashlock calmed down. This was just a theory at this point, and his sample size was too small. He can conduct more experiments when Larry returns with corpses in a month. A day passed. Ashlock awoke to another bird landing on his branch. This one was far bigger than the previous one, almost like a winged lizard with an ugly head and razor-sharp teeth. Unfortunately for this bird lizard thing, it hadn't developed the most fantastic sense of smell, and it happily chewed on a poisonous yellow fruit. Once it got to the seed, it swallowed that too. After eating a few fruits, it flapped its feathered wings and glided off the side of the mountain toward the many human villages. Ashlock followed it with Eye of the Tree God, curious if the poison would take effect. Later that day, as the afternoon sun warmed the land, the creature was in obvious agony. It clawed at its stomach and gasped for breath as its face rested between panic and despair. Finally, it fell out of a tree and began to roll around the forest floor, and then, after a few minutes, it twitched and eventually ceased all movement. Dead. Then Ashlock saw an odd thing occur. The creature's corpse began to rapidly decay. Ashlock felt like he was watching a time-lapse as it happened so fast. Not even an hour passed, and the creature's skin split open, and a black shoot with a single red leaf emerged. Was that a baby demonic tree? Chapter 40. Magic Truffles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The cold early winter breeze rustled Ashlock's leaves as a familiar face returned to the desolate courtyard. The lazy tree stopped cultivating to focus on Larry crawling through the hole in the pavilion wall while dragging a sack of silk 5 times his size. As Larry hauled the sack, a deep trail was left in the training courtyard sand as he approached the wall separating the central courtyard from the training grounds. Larry then decided to hurl the sack of corpses over the wall. It sailed through the air before landing with a sickening crunch and squelch as if the sack contained a soup of bones and organs. "Thank you, Larry," Ashlock said, his first words in over a month. With nothing to do except watch birds eating his seeds and dying, he was starved for any kind of interaction. Larry just stood there, clearly unresponsive to Ashlock's praise. Which was unfortunate. Ashlock was sure Larry could be a fine gentleman if the mind control was lifted, but for now, that was impossible. Larry had become too strong to let off his leash. Ashlock could feel the power in Larry's presence had grown since his evolution but clearly hadn't entirely broken the A-grade barrier, as Larry wasn't asking to evolve yet. Should I send him out to the wilderness again or? Ashlock knew Stella and Diana would return eventually. He needed human corpses for communication, and the cold weather would keep them preserved for longer. Larry, go out and hunt. Keep casualties in one area to a minimum before moving, and keep the cultivators on their toes. Then, return when I call for you through the link. Ashlock knew their link was weak at far range, but he could still transmit something since Larry reacted to his message last time with some confusion, so the spider should respond this time now that he has clear instructions to return when called. Larry didn't dawdle and left immediately to fulfill his summoner's orders. After watching the massive spider leave, Ashlock felt sleepy due to the cold weather. Luckily he had a bundle of corpses to keep him busy. With no sign of Stella or Diana returning anytime soon, Ashlock decided to indulge a little and confirm his fear that the system would limit his growth somewhat. As the sack had been left lying against one of his exposed roots, Ashlock used his chi to burn away the silk. Unfortunately, some of the corpses also got charred by his lilac soul flames, but Ashlock was fine with that, as he lacked control without any techniques to guide his chi usage. The heap of corpses spilled out onto the damaged runic formation in a surge of blood and guts, and Ashlock didn't recognize a single monster as a creature from Earth. There were the occasional similarities, such as a few monsters with black exoskeletons that made them look like overgrown termites. However, they were also covered in red warts and a mysterious blue slime substance that seemed poisonous. Overall, something Ashlock would expect to be present in a sci-fi world rather than a cultivator-themed one. Ashlock noticed that the insect-looking monsters were far more enormous than they should be, likely due to the dense ambient chi out in the wilderness. Kinda like back on Earth in the dinosaur era where the higher oxygen content allowed dinosaurs to grow far larger. Now that Ashlock thought about it some more, wasn't this world basically a prehistoric age world imbued by a magical essence that made everything able to compete with one another through cultivation? The strongest cultivators could triumph over the most infamous monsters through the power of chi. Hell, even a tree can become a spirit tree and develop a semi-conscious mind. Another example of this world's bizarre speed of growth was his demonic tree seeds. The first one that sprouted from the corpse of that reptile bird was now 2 meters tall after only a month. Of course, some of that early growth spurt was likely due to the tree growing from the chi left in the bird's corpse, but its growth was still ridiculous. Every day, birds came by and consumed his fruit like clockwork. Ashlock had begun to grow many different types of fruit that weren't poisonous in hopes the birds would bring their flock to feast on his fruit, where around 10% contained poison in a seed. So far, this had resulted in around 1 in every 10 birds dying somewhere in the forests at the base of his mountain peak, causing a baby demonic tree to sprout from its corpse. Ashlock stopped thinking about his children and focused on his courtyard. With the corpses now sprawled out and hunger tugging at the back of his mind, Ashlock got to work on his experiment. Using Root Puppet, he targeted the monster with the highest cultivation and most intact body within the heap, a basilisk with 3 heads and a purple horn of varying length sprouting from its 3 foreheads. It took almost an hour due to its size, but eventually, Ashlock managed to take control of the basilisk, and he could estimate its soul core was at least a few stages higher than his own, perhaps around the 7th stage of the soul fire realm. Does that mean Larry is at least at the 7th stage? Maybe even stronger. Ashlock couldn't imagine how Larry defeated such a giant basilisk with its armor plate scales and high cultivation, but luckily that wasn't important right now. Using the basilisk to move the corpses, Ashlock separated them into 3 distinct piles. Due to Ashlock's higher cultivation and the corpses releasing their chi slowly into the atmosphere, Ashlock could guess their cultivation level within a few stages of accuracy. For example, the first pile contained a lot of insect-like creatures. According to Ashlock's estimation, these were all lower level than him, likely in the late stages of the chi realm. Deciding to test this pile first, Ashlock cast Devour. When he had been a small demonic sapling in the 6th stage of the Chi realm, a stack of mortal corpses with a few early stage Soul Fire realm cultivators sprinkled in had been worth over 700 sacrifice credits. A few hours passed, and the dreaded notification came in. Plus 98 SC, less than 100 credits for a similar sized heap of monster corpses. Ashlock mentally frowned. There was always the chance this was because the corpses were monsters rather than humans, but he couldn't think of a plausible explanation for why that would matter. The second pile of corpses had more mammal-looking ones with a few strong insect types. This pile was smaller than the first by about half, but Ashlock could feel the amount of chi radiation off to be much denser. Casting Devour, it took him until the following morning to absorb everything. Plus 327, about what I expected. The pile contained a half corpses, yet had netted him over 3 times as much. So devouring corpses of equal strength to me is 6 times more efficient than devouring monsters at the peak of the Chi realm. Now Ashlock was really curious about the third pile. It contained only 2 corpses. A half-eaten polar bear-looking monster and the basilisk, which he had released from his control before its soul core shattered. Despite only 2 corpses, due to their chi-dense meat, muscular bodies, and size, Ashlock took until evening to finish his meal. Plus 603, the point gain was surprisingly high for only 2 bodies. Due to their cultivation being higher than him, it was hard for Ashlock to gauge their exact strength, especially the bear, but it had been in such bad condition Ashlock didn't wish to control it with Root Puppet. Deciding it was time to cash in his points, Ashlock summoned his sign .in system. Idle Tree Daily Sign. In System Day. 3204 Daily Credit. 54 NV. Sacrifice Credit. 1050, Sign In. Yes. Sign in successful, 1104 credits consumed, unlocked an A.grade skill. Magic Mushroom Production, . Ashlock didn't know what to say. Magic mushrooms. He waited for the system to bless him with his new skill's capabilities, and once he learned the contents, he knew he was beyond fucked just from their vague description. I am going to become the most sought after tree on this continent. Opening up his new mushroom production menu, Ashlock selected a truffle as it was the most expensive type of mushroom in terms of chi to produce, and then he looked at all the options he could add. Chi fruit production allowed Ashlock to add skills as temporary buffs like poison resistance, or just add poison to his fruit. He could also add seeds and change the flavor, color, size, and more. Whereas the magic mushroom production let him alter the psychedelic effects the mushroom induced and what impact those would have on the cultivator. I can add hallucinations so a cultivator can face their inner demons or divine inspiration about their chosen Tao. Ashlock scoffed at the estimated year production time while also taking up a small percentage of his total chi intake. Chi he should be using to dig deeper with his roots, grow taller, or increase his cultivation stage. Ashlock scrolled through the options. If he was going to sacrifice some of his growth to raise a darn magic truffle, then it better be the greatest cultivation drug of all time. And then he found the perfect option for Stella. To his knowledge, she didn't have any heart demons, and the divine inspiration was listed as having a slight chance of working. But there was one option that was both perfect and guaranteed. Improve spirit root. Ashlock selected the option and set the truffle to grow deep underground next to one of the thickest roots through the mountain. There was also a deposit of spirit stone or nearby, which might help lighten the load on Ashlock to provide all of the chi for the truffle's growth. With the truffle set to be completed in a year, Ashlock went back to sleep. Stella stretched her back and rubbed the sleepiness from her eyes. She felt like she had become part of the library's chair as she relished in the warm afternoon sun cascading through one of the skylights built into the library's ceiling and huffed to get her bed hair out of her face. Diana lay on the opposite side of the table, catching a nap with open books that looked older than the world itself encircling her head. Stella cheekily moved her head to the side, allowing the sun's beam to land directly on Diana's sleeping face. The black-haired girl groaned and tried to subconsciously hide behind the pile of books to escape the sun. "Say, Diana." Stella poked the top of Diana's head with a pencil. Diana pushed herself off the desk with another groan and squinted at Stella. "What you want? Morning already." "Afternoon." Stella corrected the girl with a smile. "Do you think we should head back?" "Head back?" Diana blinked, and then relief washed over her. "Oh please, yes, I hate books, and we have been here for months." "But wait." Her eyes wandered over the mountain of old books and hundreds of pages covered in squiggly lines that were apparently ancient runes. "Thought you learned it all?" Stella shook her head sadly. "Not even close, but I should be able to piece together the general gist of a message tree leaves. But more importantly," Stella pointed to the stack of paper, "I copied all the books so I can continue to practice once we leave here." Diana huffed as she stood up, some crazy dedication there to learn such an old and useless language. Stella laughed lightly as she walked around the desk and the stack of paper vanished into her spatial ring. "Old? Definitely. Useless? Absolutely not. I'm on the cusp of figuring out how to make some runic arrays with this old language. Maybe Ash can help me fill in the gaps." Diana's voice dropped to a whisper as the pair walked side by side through the labyrinth of bookcases. "Are you sure shortening a future world tree's name to Ash is a good idea? Will it tolerate that?" Stella rolled her eyes. "Ashlock is such a long name. Ash is so much cuter." Diana let out a long sigh as the two walked down the marble steps and made their way out of the library into the summer afternoon sun. She almost wept tears of joy at finally smelling fresh air. It had been many months since Diana had last been outside. "Talking of cute." Stella grinned from the side as she pushed her hair behind her ear. "Wanna go shopping before we head back?" Diana had never heard such sweet words. She grabbed Stella's hand, causing the girl to yelp, and dragged her toward the most expensive shopping district. She still had a lot of crowns saved up in her spatial ring to spend.